Cartier watches worth $3,000 each. Political editor Andrew Probyn reports.
Australia Post can fulfil those orders.
For some, a global pandemic's been great for business.
Whatever you never thought you'd be doing.
Australia Post's had a parcel-led bonanza. Posties doing the legwork for stay-at-home shoppers.
In unprecedented times, unprecedented volumes.
A modest $600 thank you paid to those who deliver the mail. Posties managers doing much, much better, sharing $60 million in bonus payments, or about $24,000 each on average. But it's the lavishing of the top brass that's caused astonishment.
They got watches.
And what were the watches?
They were a Cartier watch of about a value of $3,000 each.
A timepiece of the rich and famous, awarded to 4 executives for ensuring Commonwealth Bank, Westpac and NAB customers could do their banking at post offices.
Do you, Ms Holgate, consider it appropriate to use taxpayers' money to buy Cartier watches?
I have not used taxpayers' money. We are a commercial organisation.
Christine Holgate's time at the helm on hold, at least temporarily.
They need to take great care.
The Communications Minister announcing an investigation into the Cartier kerfuffle.
She will be asked to stand aside during the course of this investigation.
So appalled and shocked was I by that behaviour. She's been instructed to stand aside, and if she doesn't wish to do that, Mr Speaker, she can go.
Christine Holgate's future hangs on a quick-fire 4-week inquiry that'll report directly to Cabinet. But with integrity the hot topic, her fate's likely to be decided much sooner. Fancy French watches aside, the idea that Australia Post should be shelling out tens of millions of dollars in bonuses under a business model that's flourished under widespread shutdowns stinks. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
As many as 50 elderly people are sexually assaulted in Australian aged care homes each week. That was just one of the shocking revelations heard at the Royal Commission as the 2-year inquiry draws to a close. It's called for a series of changes to reform the sector, but there's division among commissioners on how that should work.
Jennifer Lyon had a career in aged care, but it's only in retirement she's become an advocate for fellow residents.
The privatisation of aged care has made a huge difference. There's less skill. There are less RNs and there is much more dementia.
The 87-year-old and her friends made a submission to the Royal Commission into Aged Care.
Residential care, however hard they try, it's someone else's rules, someone else's food, someone else's schedule.
Lawyers running the commission started making their final submissions to the inquiry today.
People making submissions raise concerns about neglect, emotional abuse, physical abuse or assault, restrictive practices, financial abuse and sexual abuse or assault.
Disturbingly, the Commission heard an estimated 50 elderly people are sexually assaulted in homes each week.
Commissioners, this is a national shame. High-quality aged care is not being delivered on a systemic level.
Council assisting have made more than 120 recommendations. It includes mandated staffing levels, registering support workers and new laws based on human rights. There's also a proposal for a demand-driven approach to aged care places, an independent pricing authority, a new Inspector General and a permanent Aged Care Commission. But commissioners are split on one reform, with Linnell Briggs against an expensive new commission in favour of a revamped health department.
Under such a model, the department will be staffed appropriately and resourced properly.
Jennifer Lyon hopes the commission addresses ageism.
Engage with us. It's not so bad to be old.
The inquiry will hand down its report next year. Alison Branley, ABC News.
Video footage obtained by ABC Investigation shows members of an SAS patrol in Afghanistan talking about the apparent execution of a totally compliant prisoner by one of their comrades. The patrol commander is heard telling other SAS soldiers he is not happy with what has happened, while other soldiers express concerns that they could have been accidentally shot in the incident. Mark Willesey has this exclusive report.
It is mid-May 2012 and it's another day on operations in southern Afghanistan. The SAS has just cleared a village. 3 members of the patrol gather next to a compound wall. It's a rare moment for contemplation.
It is ridiculous. No, that's ridiculous. If I thought it would make any difference, I know. I'd say something to him. His eyes roll back like a shark. Yeah. He's an idiot.
The SAS operators are talking about a senior Special Forces comrade and his handling of a compliant prisoner under his control.
He's totally compliant. Mate, I was more worried about getting shot. Getting shot while he's swinging his weapon around.
I was on the other side. Where the puck was. Thought I was going to get shot.
A puck is a person under confinement. In other words, an Afghan prisoner. In this case, it appears the prisoner has been shot and killed. And the SAS soldiers are also concerned that their safety was put at risk by their comrade's ill-disciplined use of his weapon.
Bullshit. I'm not happy with it. One of the engineers, they're going, yeah, that happened. He just took him in the corner and shot him.
Footage taken from the same helmet camera earlier in the raid shows SAS soldiers in a village rounding up and detaining Afghan men. It is unclear if the SAS soldiers are talking about this raid or a previous one. The metadata of the helmet camera footage reveals the conversation happened just a day after an operation in a village called Sheena. During that raid, the SAS killed 3 Afghans. ABC Investigations understands at least 2 of those killings are regarded as suspicious and are under investigation by the Inspector General of Defence as part of its wide-ranging inquiry into Special Forces war crimes in Afghanistan. Defence has told the ABC it is inappropriate to comment on the SAS helmet camera footage while the inquiry is ongoing. Mark Willesey, ABC News.
Just as things were looking up, Melbourne is dealing with a new COVID cluster that's put hundreds of people into isolation and closed 2 schools. Today's 5 cases are all linked to the outbreak, with 4 cases in the Hume Shire and 1 in Banyule.
Dressed up ready for Book Week, these Dallas primary students were this morning turned away at the front gate.
I'm a little bit sad. Why? Because I don't get to show my outfit.
The kids was so excited to attend the school with the dress up today.
The school's closed as a precaution. So is the nearby East Preston Islamic College after a grade 5 student there tested positive to COVID-19.
Ultimately, someone who should not have been at school went to school. They weren't positive, they were a close contact. They have subsequently tested positive.
It appears a communication mix-up caused the student to leave isolation before their 14 days was up.
I do understand that the family were communicated with each day, but clearly there has been a breakdown somewhere.
There are 16 active cases across 6 households in the northern suburbs cluster. At least 500 people are self-isolating, including 73 close contacts from the Preston Islamic School. The outbreaks also spread to a community housing block in Broadmeadows, where 120 residents are self-isolating while everyone is tested.
They just said 24 hours, stay home. I can't see my family now, I can't see my kid, can't pick them up from school.
I should stress this is an abundance of caution approach.
Door knockers are urging nearby residents with symptoms to get tested.
We don't wish to unnecessarily alarm people, but suddenly it's gone from 36 people being asked to self-isolate and to quarantine. It's now 500. That's a big step up.
The health department says it's moving towards a system where families will have just the one point of contact to avoid confusing advice. Doctors who've been calling for this model for months says it's come far too late.
Communication between DHHS and the family can sometimes be inconsistent and can also they can be given conflicting advice and difficult for families to interpret, exactly what to do next.
They also want the government to warn schools in the future if their students should be self-isolating. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
Well, meantime, New South Wales Parliament has erupted over new questions about the Premier's relationship with disgraced former Wagga Wagga MP Daryl Maguire. One Nation's Mark Latham claimed Mr Maguire had a key to the Premier's house. But Gladys Berejiklian fired back, labelling the allegations horrible and untrue.
The Premier would have been hoping that the spotlight on her secret relationship would be subsiding. But the questions keep coming.
Given revelations today that Daryl Maguire had a key and ongoing access to your home for several years, including as recently as last month, why have you been misleading the people of New South Wales?
I respect the people of this state too much to respond to the kind of horrible things that have been said, which frankly shouldn't have been said, which aren't even true.
The allegation that Daryl Maguire had a key was first raised in the Upper House.
Given that Daryl Maguire had a key to the Premier's North Shore home for many years, and while cohabitating came and went as he liked, as recently as last month, doesn't this demonstrate an intimate personal relationship?
Then Labor put it to the Premier in the Lower House again and again.
The Leader of the Opposition has chosen to ask the same question 3 times. The Leader of the Opposition has chosen to repeat things that are factually incorrect.
The Premier has maintained that her 5-year relationship with Daryl Maguire wasn't of sufficient status, and that's why she didn't tell her family, nor did she disclose it to colleagues. But she's also revealed that she loved him and thought they could get married. The scrutiny has been relentless on the Premier for the past 2 weeks, but she survived with the bulk of the Liberal Party room supporting her. And she won't have to face constant questioning at Macquarie Street. That pressure valve has been released now that Parliament is going into recess for a fortnight.
I don't care what anybody says. I'm here for the people of this state. I'm here to do my job.
That job has been a little harder than usual lately. Ashley Raper, ABC News, Sydney.
A 76-year-old grandmother has been charged with the murder of her autistic son more than 50 years ago. An investigation began only recently after police received a public tip. Officers are now searching a property in Brisbane's southwest for human remains.
50 years of family life dragged out for all to see. Behind it all, a secret. A toddler named Peter John Enright.
Investigations to date lead us to believe that Peter was murdered sometime between 1968 and 1969.
He was one of 11 children who lived in this house in the Brisbane suburb of Inala.
He was number 4 in the family. A lot of those siblings were unaware, had heard stories and that, but you know, he was never reported missing as such.
His mother, Maureen Ann Enright, is now accused of his murder. Neighbours are shocked by the allegations.
It's unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. It's the unknown. Nobody knew.
Police are searching for Peter under the family home with ground-penetrating radar.
We're searching for a body of remains. We're optimistic at this stage. But
Mrs Enright appeared briefly in the Richlands Magistrates Court this morning. Her lawyer speaking outside for the family.
She's frail, she's vulnerable, and so understandably they're very concerned.
Police say the investigation is a result of a tip-off that came through in August. It's believed Peter would have been 3 or 4 years old at the time of his death and that he had autism. Police want anyone who lived on Polaris Street in the 1960s and 70s to come forward. Baz Ruddick, ABC News, Inala.
Victorian police have charged 11 young people, 2 of them just 13 years old, with the murder of a teenager in Deer Park in June. 15-year-old Solomon Tofulaniki was killed when a group attacked him outside Brimbank shopping centre. He was fatally stabbed and died at the scene. At the time of Solomon's death, community leaders called for an end to gang violence, while his parents expressed love and forgiveness for the perpetrators. 9 teenagers will appear in court in December, and 2 men in their 20s will appear late next month. A Sydney man has admitted killing 4 children while driving drunk and high on drugs in the city's northwest back in February. Samuel Davidson pleaded guilty to 7 charges, including 4 counts of manslaughter, when he faced Parramatta Court today. The 30-year-old lost control of his car and ploughed into siblings Anthony, Angelina, Sienna Abdullah and their cousin Veronique Saka at Oatlands. The children were walking to the shops to get ice cream when they were killed. Davidson will be sentenced at a later date. A crime of industrial manslaughter is set to become law in Western Australia after new work safety legislation passed the state's Legislative Council. Individuals convicted of industrial manslaughter will face 5 to 20 years in jail, and companies will receive a maximum fine of $10 million. They will also be increased penalties for breaches of other workplace laws. Regan Ballantine, whose son died in a workplace fall in 2017, says the legislation will benefit and protect people.
Yesterday, our loved ones' lives were given more meaning. Their lives will leave a legacy that will benefit future generations and help to ensure that others never stand in our shoes.
The bill will now go back to the Legislative Assembly for a final vote next month. Temporary visa holders experiencing domestic violence say they're staying in relationships because they're worried about being forced out of the country. Experts are now calling for changes to the immigration system to better protect vulnerable women.
This temporary visa holder, who we'll call Ellie, met her husband in an online English class. Both from Iran, he was studying here, and she moved to Australia as a dependent. The abuse started immediately.
At that time, I saw my death, and I had a feeling of a person is going to be killed.
Ellie says her temporary visa status made it more difficult to flee.
Women shelters didn't accept me. They said, we couldn't help you because you are on temporary visa and you don't have Centrelink.
She's on a bridging visa and waiting on a decision as to whether she can stay in the country. The acting Immigration Minister, Alan Tudge, says there are family violence provisions which allow temporary partner visa holders to be granted permanent residence. Over 5 years, 2,500 people were granted permanent visas under these provisions. And the Minister says no temporary visa holder who experiences domestic violence will have their visa cancelled. But advocates warn there are women falling through the cracks. Mikkel Morris leads the Multicultural Family Violence Centre In Touch. About half the women who contact them aren't covered by those provisions.
What we're calling for the government to do is to introduce a 2-year visa with Centrelink rights, with working rights and with health rights.
Family violence agencies have real concern that women feel trapped because they often don't have adequate access to income and services.
When they come forward, services can't help them very much. They're limited in terms of the kinds of safety and supports that they can access because of the visa they hold.
Marie Seagrave studies the impact of family violence on temporary visa holders.
I don't think it's well understood that abusive partners promise to sponsor someone on a partner visa and then deny them that and use that as leverage to control and abuse them further.
An argument for empowering the vulnerable in a relationship. Nicole Asher, ABC News, Melbourne.
The threat of foreign meddling in the US election has become a public reality today, with less than a fortnight to go until America votes. Security and intelligence agencies have blamed Iran and Russia for harassing voters with false and threatening emails. The dirty tricks were revealed on the same day former President Barack Obama went campaigning for his former running mate Joe Biden. From Washington, Greg Jennett reports.
Don't be discouraged.
On the sidewalks or on centre stage, every old campaigner knows turning up the volume goes a long way to getting out the vote.
Hello, Philadelphia!
In an energetic outing for an absent Joe Biden, Barack Obama stood in a socially distanced car park to try to reclaim Pennsylvania and to rewrite some history on the Trump presidency, its unscripted attempts to control COVID-19.
We literally left this White House a pandemic playbook. We don't know where that playbook went.
And the president's handling of the truth.
Truthfulness and democracy, these aren't Republican or Democratic principles, they're American principles.
Truth is also a prime target for outsiders. Intelligence and law enforcement have blown the whistle on Iranian and Russian cyber actors targeting registered voters with misinformation. Some of it threatening reprisals by the anti-left Proud Boys movement against those who don't vote Republican.
To intimidate voters, incite social unrest, and damage President Trump.
Authorities say their defences against foreign interference worked. They acted immediately.
These actions are desperate attempts by desperate adversaries.
If democracy runs on accepted rules for debating ideas, then this one was tainted long ago. It doesn't take foreign actors to bring questions of legitimacy, vote rigging, money politics and honour into this campaign. President Trump was at it weeks ago, and still is.
He's preparing for his second and final debate with Joe Biden and thriving on raucous rally crowds in North Carolina.
We've got the White House, we're winning, that's it.
Whether he'd relinquish that office quietly if he lost is a moot point for at least another 13 days. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Washington.
Well, it's certainly getting close. You can watch tomorrow's final US presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden right here on ABC News. Our extensive coverage starts at 11:45 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. The first group of Australians to return home on specially chartered Qantas flights will finally be leaving London later tonight. It's part of an effort to bring home thousands of Australians who are still stranded overseas. Reporter Nick Dole is at Heathrow Airport.
Well, pretty soon a Qantas 787 with 175 people will take off from here at Heathrow. There are some very relieved passengers who've already arrived at the airport to check in. Of course, there are some commercial flights still available to Australia, but because of the caps that the states have put on arrivals, it's really meant there's so few seats available, and many passengers simply can't afford the exorbitant fares that some airlines have been charging. Others say that they've got tickets, but they've been continuously bumped off flights so that the airlines can stay below the cap. So it's been a long journey for many people just getting to the airport today, and those we spoke to were thrilled they're finally heading home.
So excited, man. Yeah, I've been waiting like 3 months of cancelled flights and stuff.
It's been really good that thankfully we're able to get home now. The rest of my family haven't met him yet, so it'll all be a great reunion when I see my family again.
It's really exciting too, even though we're going to Darwin, even though it's going to be a bit of an experience, it's just getting back onto the home soil.
Of course, they won't be going straight home. They'll be flown to Darwin, where they'll then go into quarantine at the Howard Springs facility for 14 days. Passengers have paid about $2,000 for a seat on this flight, which is being underwritten by the federal government. There'll be a couple more flights from London, 4 from New Delhi and another flight from Johannesburg as well. All in all, the federal government says this will make space for an additional 5,000 Australians to get home, but there are about 30,000 Australians still wanting to return, so the remainder will have to find their own way back.
Nick Dole in London. Thailand's government has lifted the ban on large gatherings, which it imposed last week to try to end months of mass protests. The decision came after activists clashed with riot police in Bangkok overnight. The protesters have given Thailand's Prime Minister a 3-day deadline to resign or face more demonstrations. Southeast Asia correspondent Zoe Ford reports.
Defiant and determined, the protesters marched towards Thailand's government house. The Prime Minister banned large gatherings last week to try to rein in the growing student-led protest movement. It only compelled more Thais to join in. With helmets and masks, they came ready for battle and were soon met by this. A breakaway group of activists managed to surround the riot police and tension soon boiled over. The protesters have made unprecedented demands for reform to Thailand's monarchy. They also want a new constitution and the military-backed Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to resign.
If he doesn't resign within 3 days, he will face the people again.
This afternoon, the Prime Minister lifted the ban on public gatherings and is recalling Parliament next week to try to de-escalate the situation.
While I can listen to and acknowledge the demands of protesters, I cannot run the country based on protester or mob demands.
Yellow shirt royalists say calls for political change are acceptable, but the monarchy must not be touched.
We don't agree with demonstrations that don't respect the law or the rights of others, while also creating a divide within the nation.
A nation that's no stranger to a political protest, but with calls for monarchy reform as well, there's never been one as bold as this. Zoe Ford, ABC News.
Pope Francis has expressed support for same-sex civil unions. Vatican observers say it's the pontiff's strongest remark yet on the issue, but doesn't signal a change to Catholic doctrine. In a new film called Francesco, the Pope says homosexuals have a right to be in a family.
What we have to create is a civil union law. That way, they are legally covered.
As an archbishop in Argentina, he opposed efforts to legalise same-sex marriage. Two teenagers from North Queensland have mounted a last-ditch effort to stop Adani's Carmichael mine from going ahead. They say emissions from the mine's coal could speed up the demise of the Great Barrier Reef. A law firm representing the young women is urging the Environment Minister to review new expert evidence and revoke the mine's approval.
The Great Barrier Reef is a special place for 19-year-old Claire Galvin.
I've spent my entire life snorkelling the reef, and I remember the first time I went snorkelling, it was such a magnificent sight, and it's just absolutely, every time we go out to the reef, it is absolutely stunning.
Now she and another Queensland teenager are leading a last-ditch attempt to stop Adani's Carmichael mine, worried that emissions from burning coal threaten the reef's survival.
The impacts of the carbon emissions from this mine will devastate the reef, and we don't want that to happen.
A law firm acting for the teenagers has written to Environment Minister Susan Lee, calling for the revocation of Adani's approval.
We're increasingly outraged by the failure of governments everywhere to really consider the overall climate consequences of these kinds of actions.
Climate scientist Bill Hare says burning all the coal from Adani's site would use up 3.3% of the world's remaining carbon budget.
I think the only responsible thing for an Australian government to do is to actually review the licences for these projects and to stop them.
Even if global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees, climate science says the reef will be severely damaged and at 2 degrees, ruined. The mine was approved on the basis it wasn't clear it would add to carbon emissions because its coal might replace other supplies, but that's under challenge.
The market substitution assumption that a large new coal mine will have no implications for emissions is highly implausible.
Minister Ley has a choice. She has a choice to be on the right side of history.
The minister says she'll consider the correspondence, but it has to be said it's a long shot. Adani argues its project has had one of the most rigorous assessments in Australian history. Stephen Long, ABC News.
Let's take a look at what is coming up on the business now. Here's Alicia Barry.
Tonight, on Notice, shareholder anger flares at Crown directors after a slew of corporate scandals. And banking on beauty, the COVID lockdown hits fast forward on an e-commerce IPO. All this and more at 8:45 Eastern Daylight Time.
Meantime, police will be keeping an